Welcome back to the Product Data Master e-learning course for Module 3, using the item creation form method. My name is Jess, and I will be assisting you throughout this training module. Prior to watching this training, I highly recommend that you view Module 1 entitled Product Data Master PDM Introduction and Overview. In this module, I introduce you to our PDM portal and I give you a preview of what's covered in the training for Modules 2 through 4. For Module 2, which is entitled What to Expect When Using the PDM Portal and Features of the PDM homepage, I go over the key features of the Smartsheet template, which are imperative for setting up your products in the PDM portal. Also, in Module 2, I discuss the general guidelines for the dimensions of your product for item setup. In addition, I discuss the system requirements for accessing and running the PDM portal effectively. Therefore, if you have not watched the first two modules, I would highly recommend you review Modules 1 and 2 before moving forward with Module 3. Depending on you, this training module will take 35 minutes to complete. In this module, I will demonstrate the following: reviewing the business processes for item setup, using the EPH guide to locate the appropriate product category, how to set up an item using the item creation form method, duplicating items based on an existing item, using the validation to identify errors prior to and after uploading to PDM, uploading the Smartsheet to the PDM portal, how to make corrections when an item is rejected, and resubmitting the item record. This module will take approximately 35 minutes to complete. When setting up your products in the PDM portal, you can use one of two methods. The first method is the item creation form, and the other method is vendor item create. There are advantages to both methods. In this module, I'll demonstrate how to set up an item using the item creation form method, and in Module 4, I'll demonstrate how you can set up your products in the PDM portal using the vendor item create method. These are the business processes for item setup from start to finish using the item creation form method. To help you understand these processes using this method, I'll demonstrate what steps you need to take to accomplish what's listed here. For this module, you'll need the EPH guide, which is located on the vendor portal, here under the References category on the vendor portal. Allow me to make a recommendation, which I think will be very helpful to you now and in the future. Before you start the item setup process, know and have the features or details for your products. Why is it important to have that detail beforehand? Take note of this running list. Based on the EPH that you select for your product, PDM generates specific attribute questions, as we call them, that correlate to the EPH that you select. When using the Smartsheet template for the item creation form method, you will fill the details for your products into those attribute fields. By having all the necessary details for your product beforehand, you help facilitate the speed to market process. Did I just hear someone say, cha-ching? Consumers love detail, and the detail that you provide for your products goes to our website, as you see here in the Features and Specifications table, and to the store signs in our stores. To see the item setup process from start to finish, I'll use as my product an insulated travel mug. To start the item setup process, I'll click the EPH hierarchy icon located here on the item creation form widget. On the Select Nodes window, I'll click the expand arrow next to the Enterprise Product Hierarchy option. At this point, the PDM portal needs to know what type of product or products that I will be setting up. Therefore, I need to locate the appropriate EPH using this hierarchy list. In looking at this list, Where would you begin to look for the right EPH for the insulated travel mug? Any ideas? Again, in helping the speed to market process, it would be good to know beforehand where the appropriate EPH is located before we start the item setup process. On the vendor portal page, under References, double-click the EPH guide link. On the downloadable link, click the up arrow. Next, click the Open option on the pop-up menu. With the EPH guide open, I'll click the Product Type tab, which gives me this hierarchy. I'll enlarge the EPH guide to give you a better view. To keep this search simple, I'll use the filter feature for the product type field column to locate the appropriate EPH for our insulated travel mug. Remember, we're working with a travel mug. I'll click in the search field and type travel mug. As I type, the EPH for the travel mug appears on the product type page. To close the filter dialog box, I'll click anywhere on the Excel spreadsheet. Now look at the results for my search query. For my search, there are 3 options for where I can locate the travel mug on the Select Nodes window. Which one of the 3 options would you pick as your EPH? Did someone say, does it really matter since they're all travel mugs? If you recall in Module 1, I stated, as you work with the enterprise product hierarchy, please understand that selecting the correct EPH for your product type is critical as the item creation form generates attribute questions specific to that product category. In short, the PDM portal generates a Smartsheet template or Excel workbook with specific fields that correlate to your product. Say for instance, I selected the wrong EPH, like drinkware, for my product. In comparing the 2 Smartsheets, most of the attribute fields are the same. However, when you look closely at the Smartsheet for drinkware, notice the attribute fields that differ from the actual Smartsheet that's needed for the water bottles and insulated drinkware. Keep in mind that our product type is an insulated travel mug, not a wine glass. Based on the attribute fields on the Smartsheet for dinnerware style, this is the wrong EPH, and picking the wrong EPH slows down the speed to market process. Therefore, to answer your question, yes, it does matter which EPH you pick. Of the 3 options, I want the EPH, water bottles and insulated drinkware for my insulated travel mug. Using the EPH guide, we know how to locate it on the Select Nodes window of the PDM portal. What if you're not able to locate an EPH for your product, and you've looked through the EPH guide thoroughly? What do you do? When and if that should happen, make it a habit of contacting your item specialist or buyer, and they'll give you a recommendation for what you should do regarding an EPH. If you don't know your item specialist or buyer, contact the Support Item Setup team. Now that we know how to locate the exact EPH for our product, let's go back to the Select Nodes window in the PDM portal. Keep in mind dining, drinkware, and water bottles and insulated drinkware. I'll click the expand arrow for dining. Next, drinkware. Then I'll click the EPH, water bottles, and insulated drinkware, since our insulated travel mug falls under this EPH. This is a what you need to know about PDM moment. When you need to set up multiple items at one time, and these items are not the same, you can select multiple EPHs using the process that I just demonstrated when using the Select Nodes window. After selecting the first EPH for my insulated travel mug, I want to include another EPH for bedding protectors. Holding down the Control key on my keyboard, I'll locate and select the second EPH for bedding protectors. When holding down the Control key, you can click the expand arrow of an EPH to expand the EPH's hierarchy. Once you locate the desired EPH, still holding the Control key, click the EPH to select it. You can repeat these steps to select additional EPHs. If you select the wrong EPH, reselect it while holding down the Control key. That will deselect the EPH. Now, I'll click the EPH that's needed. Not to get ahead of ourselves, allow me to show you what the exported Smartsheet template will look like with two EPHs that I've selected. Notice how each EPH selected appears on its own tab as demonstrated here for me to populate with the needed details for each EPH. Now let's complete this process for item setup with the next step. Getting back to the exercise, after selecting the EPH, I'll click the OK button. Take note of the item creation form widget. Water bottles and insulated drinkware appear in the item creation form widget window. The Smartsheet template is where the details will be provided for my travel mug. Therefore, I need to export it from the PDM portal and download it to my computer in order to work with it. To do this, I'll click the export icon. The background process window displays. At this point, the PDM portal is generating the Smartsheet template with specific attribute fields that relate to the EPH selected. Once the Smartsheet is available, the status field will read succeeded as you see here. Next, I'll click the background process link to download the Smartsheet template. I'll click the arrow on the downloadable link for the Smartsheet template. Note the prompt at the bottom of the monitor. Depending on the operating system that you're using, Windows or Mac, you have the option to open or save the Smartsheet template. Since I'm using a Mac computer, on the pop-up menu, I'll click the Open option. For those using a Windows operating system, click the drop-down arrow on the Save button and then click the Save As option. This will allow you to save your Smartsheet in any drive and/or folder of your choice. Looking at the screen, note the message window provided by Microsoft. It's letting us know that the macros associated with this file are disabled. As you learned in Module 2, always hit the Enable Macros button. No matter what you do, always hit the Enable Macros button so the macros can work with the Smartsheet template. Notice the tabs at the bottom of the workbook. When you select an EPH for your product, the EPH name appears on the tab of the Excel worksheet. If you select multiple EPHs, as we discussed earlier, each would appear on a separate worksheet with the name of the EPH listed on the tab of that worksheet. I'll click the Water Bottles and Insulated Drinkware tab and make this my active sheet. I recommend getting into the habit of saving your Smartsheet before populating it with the needed details for your product. Anything can happen. Spilled coffee or tea, a power outage. Did someone really turn out the lights? Can we turn the lights back on, please? Thank you. Imagine you spent time populating the Smartsheet with all the needed details for your product as I demonstrated in Module 2. And within 2 minutes or less, something happens preventing you from saving your work. Here's a tip that I think will be helpful when using Microsoft Excel or any Microsoft Office product. You can actually set your preference in Excel to save your work every 1 minute, which will prevent you from losing work. Let me show you how this is done. With Microsoft Excel open, click the menu option Excel on the menu bar. On the drop-down menu, click Preferences. On the Excel Preference window, under Sharing and Privacy, click the Save option. The Save option window appears. Note the option Save Auto Recover Info in every 10 minutes. I want to change this to read every 1 minute. So, I'll click in the field and type 1. I'll close the Save option window. From this point on, Excel will save my work every minute. Amazing, right? I knew you would like it. I'll navigate to the folder where I will save my file. At this point, I can rename the file with a descriptive name, or I can leave the file name as it is. If you decide to rename the file, remember to establish the correct extension for the Microsoft Excel file. Having the right extension on your file name is important when resubmitting the Smartsheet back to the PDM portal. Looking at my example here, the file extension is .xlsm and it should remain in this format. Next, I'll click the Save button to save the Smartsheet template. To speed this process along, I've pre-populated my Smartsheet with all the required details, as you see here. Scenario time. Remember, my product is an insulated travel mug. Say for instance I had 10 more travel mugs, but in different colors. What feature could I use to add those 10 additional mugs and the detail to my Smartsheet? Do you recall? Thinking. I heard you say it. The duplicate row button. Remember the duplicate row button mentioned in Module 2. Opposed to me retyping all that information for the additional 10 products, I could use the duplicate row button. So that you know, as I hit the duplicate row button, it may appear that my rows are not being added. However, when I scroll down my Smartsheet, I see the added rows. Once my rows are added, I need to adjust the sequence column. Note, all added items have 001 as the sequence number. If you recall from Module 2, I mentioned the need to make sure that you use a sequential numbering system for this field prior to uploading it to the PDM portal. When establishing sequence digits, they should be in the following format: 001, 002, 003, 004, 005, etc. And when I click in the sequence header, note what the help text says. To establish a sequential numbering system, I'll click in the cell that contains 001 and change it to 002 and do the same for the following cell, but changing it to 003. For the sake of time, I've applied the number formats to the rest of the sequence column, as seen here. Keep in mind that I mentioned for the added travel mugs, the colors vary. However, I'll omit adding the colors now. We'll address this column later in this module. Prior to validating, check your Smartsheet to ensure all mandatory and required fields are populated with the right attribute information. Before I forget, note the detail provided in the Detail Product Information field. This will help consumers in the decision making when purchasing your product. I love detail, and so do our consumers. Now it's time to validate my Smartsheet. With the Smartsheet populated with the needed details for my EPH, I need to check the sheet to make sure it's completed and to ensure that all mandatory fields are populated. This part of the process is called Validate, and it's a required step that should be performed prior to uploading the Smartsheet back to the PDM portal for processing. Note some of the common errors some of our vendors have experienced while validating. Key attributes are missing for mandatory fields. An attribute field becomes mandatory based on a previous answer for a mandatory attribute field. The initial ship date is in the wrong format. Duplicate UPC numbers are used. These are only a few of the validation errors that vendors are experiencing when validating. So let's try to avoid making these common errors. To start the validation process, I'll click the Validate Sheet button. The Validate Smartsheet Contents dialog box appears. Even though we're working with a single item, get into the habit of unchecking the Validate Only Changed Products option checkbox. When working with several different EPHs, uncheck the Validate Only Changed Products option to avoid overlooking errors on the other EPH tabs within the Smartsheet template. I'll deselect the Validate Only Change Product option since I want to validate everything on my Smartsheet. I'll click the OK button to start the validation process. Next, I'll provide my login credentials in the Login dialog box. Since I am validating for the first time, PDM requires that I provide my username and password. Next, I'll click the Login button. In the Validate Smartsheet Contents window, notice how it provides the details of the validation results. This window provides the results of my validation. If the validation is okay, or if there are errors, errors will be listed here as you see in this example. Notice the Smartsheet page. In the Sequence column, the sequential number cell is marked in red, indicating that there is an error located within this row. Here's a what you need to know about PDM moment. When setting up different EPHs within the Smartsheet and validating, click the Validate All Product Sheet option to validate each tab in the Smartsheet. Next, I'll locate and correct the error in my Smartsheet. I'll click the Done button to close the Validate Smartsheet Contents window. Just glancing at the field, you can't tell what's wrong. However, when I click on the cell, I get a screen tip stating the problem. The primary UPC number is being used by another SKU record, and the PDM portal will not allow a UPC number to be reused. For the primary UPC field, I'll provide another UPC number. You should write this down. If you do not have a UPC number to provide for your item, or if your UPC number has more than 13 digits, then use 9999 and the PDM portal will provide you with the UPC number. Please note, this feature is only valid for private brand products that are sold exclusively at Bed Bath & Beyond. Clicking the Next Error button, we go to the brand trademark field, which is missing. I'll click the drop-down arrow and select Trademark. For the sake of time, I have selected Trademark 5 for the remainder of the products. Clicking the Next Error button, we move to the Color Name field and notice the value is missing. In the field, I'll type Matte Black for my travel mug. In addition, I've populated the color fields for the rest of the travel mugs. Looking at the Smartsheet, I've corrected all of the validation errors listed. I'll click the Validate Sheet button. Notice I didn't have to provide my login credentials again. I'll uncheck the Validate Only Change Products option. Here's a tip. When you have several EPHs that you're working with in one Excel workbook, select the Validate All Product Sheets option. I'll click the OK button to start the validation process. The Validate Smartsheet Contents window tells me that our Smartsheet is good. No errors. I'll click the Done button to close the Validate Smartsheet Content window. Then I'll save my Smartsheet. The next step in this process is to upload the Smartsheet back to the PDM portal. Prior to uploading the Smartsheet, note some of the possible causes of what could prevent a Smartsheet from uploading. The file is corrupted, macros are disabled, the file was saved with a different extension or format, the initial ship date is in the wrong format, the cost field has the dollar symbol in it, the dimension unit of measurements is incorrect. If an upload fails, the possible cause may be one of the issues listed here. Now I'll upload my Smartsheet. On the PDM portal page, using the Vendor Item Create widget, I'll click the VIC Upload Item Create Form option. The Import Configuration page appears. For the Select Import Configuration by Name field, I'll use the default option, Vendor Item Creation Import. For the Select Input File to Upload and Use field, I'll use the Choose File button and locate my file. With my file selected, I'll click the Open button. Now that I have the file that needs to be uploaded, I'll click the OK button to start the uploading process. On the small background process number, BGP, pop-up, you can click the BGP link. Here's a tip. This window appears and disappears somewhat quickly. If it disappears, use the background process icon, which is to the far right of your screen, to access the BGP link. As discussed in Module 2, use the background process icon to access this link to import your Smartsheet back to the PDM portal. Also, Notice the link used previously in this exercise to export the Smartsheet template to your computer. Notice the status field reads Succeeded. My Smartsheet was uploaded to the PDM portal successfully. I'll click the background process icon to close this window. Now I need to validate in the portal. This is a what you need to know about PDM moment. Always make it a habit, after uploading your Smartsheet to the PDM portal, to validate the item entry in the portal before submitting it for review by the item specialist and buyer. You may ask, why is this needed when I validated the Smartsheet prior to uploading it? Well, it's a possibility the Smartsheet may not have identified attribute fields with the following: fields that have become mandatory based on an answer to a previous mandatory attribute field, fields missing entries, or an entry for an attribute field is in the wrong format. By validating, you're able to correct errors quickly, which helps the speed to market process for your product. If the validation process is omitted and you submit your item for review and there are possible errors, expect the speed to market process to be delayed. In order to validate, I need to access the item that I uploaded. If necessary, I'll click the PDM link to go back to the widget homepage. On the Vendor Item Create widget, I'll click the Item Enrichment icon. Prior to clicking the link for this workstate, notice there are now 5 items in this workstate that I've uploaded. With the Vendor Item Create Item Enrichment page visible, I can individually click the check boxes for the items that I need, or I can click the Select All icon located here to select all the items listed. For the sake of time, I'll click the Select All icon. If you need to expand the window, place your mouse pointer over the window divider here, and you can drag the divider up or down to expand the window. Next, I'll click the Validate icon to validate my items. I need to make sure no mandatory fields, wrong formats, or missing information exists in my items. To correct this error, I can use one of 3 methods. First, I can export the item onto a Smartsheet template by clicking the export icon here and correct the errors on the Smartsheet. The second method that I can use is to stay on the Vendor Item Create Item Enrichment page and correct my errors within this grid. Finally, by clicking the Detail page icon here, I can work on the Detail page to locate and correct the errors. When correcting attribute field errors, you should determine the method that works best for you. Rather, it's by the Smartsheet, grid, or the Details page. In Module 4, since we will be working with the Item Create method, I'll show you how to correct errors using both the grid and the Details page to identify and correct errors. This is a what you need to know about PDM moment. Depending on the amount of EPHs and errors you're working with, you may find it easier to correct errors on the Smartsheet opposed to working in the PDM portal. For best practices, export the items with the errors to a new Smartsheet template to correct, opposed to using the original Smartsheet that you populated and saved to your computer. You may ask, why can't I just use my original Smartsheet that I populated? Which is a good question. Allow me to explain. When a Smartsheet is uploaded for the first time in the PDM portal, the UPC numbers that are assigned to each item listed will be stored in the PDM system. After validating, PDM will inform you of any errors. If you make corrections to the same Smartsheet that you previously uploaded and validated, you will receive an error message in the sequence field of the Smartsheet stating that the UPC is already in use. This is the first warning sign not to upload the original Smartsheet. But if you persist to upload it, the system, once you click the background process link, will give you the following message: completed with errors. Now your products are blocked from being uploaded to the PDM portal, which slows down the speed to market process. So to avoid this from happening, export only the items with the errors to a new Smartsheet template and make your corrections to it, opposed to using the original Smartsheet that you populated and saved to your computer. The reason why you should do this. The PDM portal recognizes your corrections to those exported items as an update to a pre-existing item. When using the original Smartsheet, PDM does not look at the correction as updates, but as a new entry to the portal. Now, I'll export my items to a new Smartsheet template. With the items still selected in the grid, I'll click the export icon. The Export Smartsheet window appears. To export my items, I'll click the checkbox for Export Data from Current Contacts. Then I'll click the Start Export button. Next, I'll click the Background Process link to export the Smartsheet template. I'll click the Excel file link to download the Smartsheet. Note the Excel file link at the bottom left-hand corner of the monitor. I'll click the up arrow to access the pop-up menu. On the pop-up menu, I'll click the Open option to open the Excel file. Since I'm working with a Mac, I'll click the Open option. Take note of the following window prompt. Test your knowledge time. In order for the Smartsheet to work correctly, what should I do at this point? Thinking. Did you say click the Enable Macros button? You're correct. You looked at your notes, didn't you? I'll click the Enable Content button to enable the macros for the Smartsheet template. First, I'll click the EPH tab to make it my active sheet. Next, the errors that appeared in the errors field of the items in the grid. For the sake of time, I've corrected all errors. Note the attribute fields that contain the errors. I'll save my work, and prior to uploading my Smartsheet to the portal, I need to validate it again, just to make sure everything is in order. On the Validate Smartsheet Contents window, I'll uncheck the Validate Only Change Products option, and I'll click the OK button. Next, I'll provide my username and password, and I'll click the Login button. Note the message in the Validate Smartsheet Contents window. For this step, there are no errors. Keep in mind, when I upload to the PDM portal, I'll need to validate again. Next, I'll save my Smartsheet, and I'm ready to upload it again to the PDM portal. On the Vendor Portal page, using the Vendor Item Create widget, I'll click the VIC Upload Item Create Form option to upload the Smartsheet to the PDM portal. The Import Configuration page appears. For the Select Input File to Upload and Use field, I'll click the Browse button and locate my file. Next, I'll click the needed file that I want to upload to PDM. Then I'll click the Open button. Next, I'll click the OK button to start the uploading process. On the small background process number BGP pop-up, I'll click the BGP link. The status field reads Succeeded. I'll click the PDM logo. On the Vendor Item Create widget, I'll click the Item Enrichment link to access the items. Remember, the Smartsheet template may not catch errors in certain fields, particularly if it's not a mandatory field, but data is required by PDM for that field. I'll click the Select All icon to select my items. I'll click the Validate icon. My validation is successful, and the items have no errors. Remember, we're still working in the Item Enrichment view. The next step in this process is to submit the item to the item specialist and the buyer for review and processing. With the item still selected, I'll click the Submit icon. Once your product or products are submitted to Bed Bath & Beyond, expect to receive an email similar to this one. When and if your submittals are rejected, there's no need to be alarmed. The item specialist or the buyer identified the attribute fields that need your attention, and he or she noted the cause for rejection in the Rejection Comments field, which also can be located on the Details page. In addition, You will receive an email similar to this one stating the reason for the submittal being rejected. If you're still taking notes, please write this down. Read your rejection email thoroughly, particularly the rejection comments field. The item specialist or buyer will provide the detail for what you should address for your submittal. Unfortunately, some of our vendors, when reading their rejection email, see only these words when reading their letter. Item not wanted should be deleted from the system, and they delete their items without reading what is in the comments in the rejection comments field. Don't delete until you read the comments in the rejection comments field. When your item is rejected, you can access the rejected item through the Vendor Item Create widget. Note here, the rejected item vendor link is showing one rejected item. I'll click the rejected item vendor link to access the rejected item. To view rejection comments from the item specialist or buyer, I can use the grid or the details page on the General tab under the Comments section. When correcting attribute field errors, after you take all 4 courses, determine the method that works best for you. Rather, it's by the Smartsheet, grid, or the detail page view. Since I have one change, I'll use the Detail Product Information attribute field here in the Details view to add my detailed description. Next, I'll click the Save button. I'll click the Validate icon. The validation is successful. For the item specialist and buyer to review my item, I'll hit the Submit button and the submission is successful. For Modules 4 e-learning, I'll demonstrate how to set up a product using the Vendor Item Create method. Using this method, I'll show you how to work within a PDM portal to start the setup process for a product using the grid. Also, in Module 4, after validating, I'll demonstrate how you can correct errors in both the grid and within the Details page view. Since you learned how to export the Smartsheet template in this module, I'll demo how you can export several items to the Smartsheet template and provide product details to the attribute fields. If you're ready to get started, click the link below and I'll see you in Module 4